This is how you get pure mentions in King James Pure Bible Search. If you're not familiar with what raw mentions and pure mentions are, if we were to type in Jesus by himself, just the name Jesus, we get 973. And the thing you should know about King James Pure Bible Search, this software, which is free to download at purebiblesearch.com, it's the best software out there for searching actual counts in the King James Bible. So when it comes to Jesus, when you just type his name in like this, there's one thing you need to know. It's not going to include the possessive mentions. So if I were to add the apostrophe, now I'm only getting 10 mentions. So see how it's showing Matthew 15:30, where it says, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, with the apostrophe. Now, if you were to want to just include everything in the count, so Jesus with or without the apostrophe, you can delete that apostrophe, and then you can add the asterisk symbol, or the star, which if you click this right here where it says show matching words and phrases, it's going to show you everything that's included in that asterisk. An asterisk will just give you what you've typed in, append it to whatever else follows. For example, if I were to do this with God and click show matching words, as you can see, it's going to give me gods, goddess, godhead, godliness, godly, God. Basically anything with God and then anything else that's after it in the Bible. With Jesus, we can simply do this because it's only giving us Jesus or Jesus with possessive mentions. So we see 983 is how many times Jesus shows up in the Bible. Now one more note is that this is not including Bar Jesus in Acts 13:6. So if I go to Acts 13:6, it says, and when they had gone through the isle unto Paphos, they found a certain sorcerer, a false prophet, a Jew, whose name was Bar Jesus. Now, because Jesus right here starts in the middle of this word, and hyphenated words are always counted as one word, it does not include this in the count. If I were to add an asterisk to the beginning of Jesus like this, then I would get 984. It would include, now you see it turned blue, now it would include Jesus, because now it's going to include the word Jesus, anything before or after it. Okay, so just so you know how that works. But by default, if you just do it like this, you're only going to get 983. Now this is the raw count of Jesus because it's including anti-mentions of Jesus in the count, or lookalike mentions if you want to call it. For example, in Colossians 4:11, it says, and Jesus, which is called Justice, who are of the circumcision. So this is not talking about Jesus Christ. We can actually remove this from the count in Pure Bible Search pretty easily. All you need to do is copy and paste this phrase that encapsulates this anti-mention of Jesus. So we're going to copy that. And then we're going to add it as a separate line. We're going to paste it in. So after we paste it in, what we want to do is hit this checkbox for exclude. And when we do that, you see it is a -1 because it sees that there is a mention of something that you've already inserted into the search. It sees that, and it's going to do a -1 for that search that you have. So now it reduced your total search to 982. Okay, so instead of 983, we're down to 982. Now there's two other anti-mentions of Jesus in the King James Bible where it's actually not referring to Jesus Christ. And those two anti-mentions are in Acts 7:45 and Hebrews 4:8. Both of them are referring to Joshua, the son of Nun, the successor of Moses from the Old Testament. So this is when Stephen is about to get martyred and he's giving his discourse to the Jews about their history. And he's going through, when he says, our fathers had the tabernacle of witness in the wilderness as he had appointed, speaking unto Moses, that he should make it according to the fashion that he had seen, which also our fathers that came after brought in with Jesus into the possession of the Gentiles. That's talking about when they came in with Joshua into the possession of Canaan, the promised land, whom God drave out before the face of our fathers unto the days of David. Some people would like to say this is talking about Jesus Christ, but the way that Stephen is talking to the Jews, to me, it's historically it would make way more sense if this is literally referring to Joshua. He's not going to be telling them that Jesus Christ, like he's trying to appeal to them. He's trying to explain something to them. When I see this passage, I say when it says whom God drave out before the face of our fathers, that's where I see Jesus in this passage, Jesus Christ at least. But when it comes to this is, I believe, definitely referring to Joshua. Okay, so same thing with Hebrews 4:8. So it says, for if Jesus had given them rest, then would he, which is referring back to David, not afterward have spoken of another day. Okay, so Joshua is translated the same name as Jesus in the New Testament, which actually makes a lot of interesting patterns because of the raw mention patterns of Jesus that you see in the King James Bible. But what we need to do is get rid of these anti-mentions. So we have Hebrews 4:8, we're going to exclude, and then we're going to Acts 7:45, and we're going to copy and paste that phrase, and we're going to exclude these as well. So now, as you can see, we've excluded all three anti-mentions, and we are left with the pure accounts of Jesus at 980. Now, when I was first going through all the mentions of Jesus to verify the count of 980, which is 70 times 7 plus 70 times 7, the one that I had trouble with, and you might as well if you go through them as well, the one that I wrestled with, if you will, was in 2 Corinthians 11:4, which many are probably familiar with this passage. It says, but I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. For if he that cometh preacheth another Jesus, whom we have not preached, or if ye receive another spirit, which we have not received, or another gospel, which we have not accepted, ye might well bear with him. So this Jesus is very interesting, this mention of Jesus, because it's referring to another Jesus, but it's also referring to Jesus Christ, right? Because it's saying this. The comparison that I make in my book and that I like to make often is, most people know who Steve Irwin is, the crocodile hunter. If you were to see another guy on TV pop up who's very similar to him and say, this guy is like another Steve Irwin. Okay, so when I say that, I'm talking about this other guy, but I'm also talking about Steve Irwin. I'm pointing you to who Steve Irwin was and who he is, and you need to know who he is in order to understand anything that I'm talking about. That's the same thing that we're talking about here. It's talking about another guy who's posing as Jesus, but it's still Jesus that we're referring back to. So you need to know who Jesus is, and it's pointing back to Jesus. I always include it because it is, at the end of the day, referring to Jesus Christ in the sense of you need to know who he is to know who this other Jesus is. The same thing kind of happens in Matthew 24:5. Says, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So this is Jesus' name. This is his name. I am Christ. Christ is his name, right? And many are going to come in his name saying, I am Christ. Now, when that person says, I am Christ, obviously they're not Christ, but they're referring back to Christ. They're referring back to his name. So that is talking about Christ. However, if we're down in Matthew 24:24, for it says, for there shall arise false Christs. Now this one's plural. And there's not more than one Christ. So this is not talking about Jesus Christ. This is talking about multiple messiahs, multiple Christs. So there's just more than one. You know that can't be true. So we exclude that from the count. False Christ, we always exclude from the count. The other one is in 2 Thessalonians 2:4. This is the Antichrist, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God, capital G. Obviously, the Antichrist is not God, but he's showing himself that he is God. So all those go in the same lump, in the same category, with the another Jesus and the I am Christ and showing himself that he is God. They all kind of fit together in that strange category. We're talking about this anti-version of who God is, but it's still talking about God himself, Jesus himself. The way that capitalization works in the King James Bible is what gives us these perfect patterns. There are some lowercase mentions of God, or gods actually. It's gods plural, but it's talking about God. And that's in Daniel, I think it's in Daniel 5. If I go to Daniel 5, here in Daniel 5:11 it says, "There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods." Now this is talking about Daniel, and obviously he doesn't have the spirit of the holy gods in him, he has the spirit of God. So anyways, the capitalization in the King James Bible gives you these perfect patterns, which I'll display more in a second here, especially with Father and Son. But here's what you need to know about Jesus. Jesus shows up 980 times in his pure form in the King James Bible. Now, this is the long way to do it, is to go through and copy and paste all these different phrases and to exclude Jesus. The shortcut is to have a text or a notepad saved with all the anti-mentions already ready to go. And what you can do is you can just simply paste it into one block. Now, the way you can do that is in Pure Bible Search, if you type in the pipe character, which is like a straight line, for most people it should be right above the return key, right below the delete key. If I just hold down shift and I click that character right there on my keyboard, that's going to give me a pipe. And I can type in anything else, and it's going to give me both Jesus or God, and how many times both of them show up in the King James Bible. So if I were to do Jesus or Christ, right, it's going to give me 1,535. Now, if I were to click this again, now it's going to you can see it's giving me Jesus or Christ. Okay, so when it comes to just copying and pasting, what we've done is I'm going to put all of these in the description of this video so you can easily copy and paste it into your own text file. That way you can just have it saved. But what I'm doing here is I am going to remove all of these. And now I'm back to 983. And I'm going to click exclude, and now I'm going to paste in all of the anti-mentions. So you can't see it all here, but if you were to go over and just go through all this line, this phrase, it includes every single one of those phrases separated by a pipe. So that's how we're getting all those 3 anti-mentions. Right here, I just put in like a note, and since it's not a word in the Bible, it doesn't recognize it, so it just kind of leaves it there as a note for myself. So I have the anti-mentions of Jesus, the verse references, and what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste all the anti-mentions of Jesus and for Christ and Son and Father, so that you can easily do this yourself in King James Pure Bible Search. Now, the other one here is if I were to do Christ, and then if I were to simply exclude false Christs, or I'll just copy and paste it in right here from my notepad and click exclude. Now we get the pure count of Jesus and Christ with 1,554, which is 777 plus 777. Now with this one, as you can see, when you drop it down, you're getting Christ, Christian, Christians, Christs. Now, keep in mind, this is being excluded because down here we have false Christs. We've removed that. We can even delete false. It's still going to just keep -2 because we're getting rid of all the Christs when they're plural like that. So it's showing up here, but it's getting excluded. So we don't need to worry about that. I just wanted to give you a heads up. If you were to search through all these results, you're not going to find any mentions of Christs. So with the pure form, you're looking at Christ as it appears in Christian, because Christian is a follower of Christ, right? So a Christian is a follower of Christ. Christians are followers of Christ. Christ, his name is in the name because that's his name. His name is in there. So you can say, okay, well, what if you don't include Christians? And you were just to include Christ or Christs like this. Now, here's where it's interesting, because if you look at the raw mentions, it also gives you 777 mentions. So this one's just looking at Jesus with the possessive or Christ with the possessive, and that's it. And in the raw form, and you're still getting 777 plus 777. Now, that doesn't happen in any other Bible. I mean, first of all, in any other Bible, you don't get these perfect counts in pure or raw. But in the King James Bible, you logically get the perfect count in two separate ways, with the two most perfect words in the entire Bible. And that is the key to realizing, wait a second, there is something going on here that should not be happening. And this just opens the door into all of the perfection that we see in the King James Bible. All of the wisdom is hid in Christ Jesus. All of it. I mean, if you don't understand these patterns, a lot of the patterns in the King James Bible might just seem random to you. But once you realize the perfection of his name, okay, now that is the key, that is the access, the green light to, okay, let's keep investigating, because obviously, if his name is that perfect in the most printed Bible of all time, then we can keep looking. Now, when it comes to Father and Son, here's where we're going to use case sensitive in the count. If I were to check off case sensitive, what it's going to do is it's going to show me all mentions of Father in the exact way that I just typed it. Now, when you're dealing with mentions of like all uppercase Lord versus Lord, it's going to give you different counts. So for example, Lord, when it's case sensitive, it's going to look at all the mentions of Lord when it's lowercase o and lowercase r and lowercase d, but capital L. But if I add another search phrase and if I type in Lord all caps, all uppercase, and click case sensitive, you can see the difference of the counts. So this is how many times that Lord, when it's all uppercase, shows up in the King James Bible, 6,472, versus Lord when the first letter only is capitalized, 1,130. Now let's go back to Father. So with Father, there is only one antimension when you're looking at the singular form like this. So that is in Luke 16:24, and it says, "And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus." The reason that's capitalized is because it's the first word of that sentence. There's other mentions of Father Abraham. If I were to type in Father Abraham, oops. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and I took your father Abraham," right here, and he said, "Nay, Father Abraham," in the same passage. In verse 30, it says, "And nay, Father Abraham." Notice how it's lowercase. That's because it's not the first word of the sentence. The only reason that's showing up as capital is because it's the first word of the sentence. Now, I believe there's raw patterns with Father, but nothing even close to what we see with the pure mentions. Nothing even close at all. So, Father, when it's capitalized, and we get rid of that one anti-mention. So all we need to do is just exclude Father Abraham, and now we have the pure mentions of Father in the King James Bible. Now, what's interesting here is if you were to look up Father and Son, and if you were to get rid of all the anti-mentions of Son, now, with Son, you're going to have to copy and paste. Unless you want to spend an hour or 2 hours going through all the anti-mentions of Son, because God calls Ezekiel Son of Man over and over and over again, over 60 times in the book of Ezekiel. So you would literally need to go through all of these like phrases and copy and paste them and plug them in, and it would probably bog down Pure Bible Search so much that it would be almost unusable, because you can't keep adding phrases and the program works smoothly. It's going to get too heavy for the program. So what you can do though is you can simply copy and paste all the 60 plus anti-mentions of Son from a text file, and make sure you click exclude first and then just click that. Now when you enter in the anti-mentions of Son, it's very important that you check off case sensitive. For whatever reason, there's 2 of them that will give you a mention that's talking about Jesus Christ's Son. If you hit case sensitive, then it's going to give you the proper anti-mentions. And you can verify that yourself if you want. What you can do is, up here in View, if you were to click View, and then if you were to hit View Excluded Search Results, you can go through where it's excluding all the anti-mentions that you've excluded. Okay, so that's a shortcut of how you can look through all the anti-mentions. So let me go back to View Search Results. Anyways, when you see Father and Son in the King James Bible, there are exactly 490 mentions in the pure capitalized form, which is 70 times 7. This is an anomaly. This is the exact equation that Jesus spoke. Jesus himself shows up 70 times 7 times 2, or 492 times 2 times 980. But Father and Son also showing up 70 times 7 times. There is no other more perfect pair than Jesus Christ. There's no more perfect pair of words than Father and Son in the whole Bible. So what do you do with all that? And then once you keep going, it gets more and more and more intricate. Now, when you want to do patterns with father or fathers with the possessive mention, and you add the little asterisk, first of all, there is no mentions of son with the asterisk, but there are mentions of song that are capital S. So if you were to add the asterisk there, you're going to notice there is no mention of son apostrophe S. So you never want to add the asterisk for son, unless you're just trying to show somebody consistency. You could do that, and then you could just uncheck superscriptions, and that's going to give you back to the normal count. Just to show somebody, well, I am looking logically at all mentions of father and son. You could do that as well. Now, when it comes to father, though, notice how there's a mention of fathers. That is in Colossians, I believe, and that is an anti-mention. So if you do ever add the asterisk to father, just keep in mind you're going to have to add the other anti-mention of fathers, or you can simply copy and paste from the text file that you've saved from the description of this video, and then it will exclude both of them automatically. Okay, so what's interesting here is if you were to go to just the Gospels, up here, if you go to the Bible, you uncheck everything, and then go open up the New Testament. I'm going to select New Testament narrative, and then I'm going to remove Acts. First of all mentions of Father and Son and their pure mentions show up 7 times 7 times 7 times in the Gospels, 343. But if you were to include the possessed mention of Father or fathers, and remember there's no mention of Son, and then if you were to look at all mentions of Jesus, now keep in mind there's also uppercase mentions of Jesus, you get 980 mentions in the Gospels. And this is all pure. There are no anti-mentions of Jesus in the Gospels. The first one is in Acts. So in the Gospels here, all mentions of Jesus, all mentions of Father and Son, give you the exact same amount of mentions that Jesus shows up in the entire Bible. At that point, you're getting into layers of perfection. You're dealing with intersecting patterns, overlapping each other, where you have Jesus 980, you have Father and Son 490, you have Father and Son 7 times 7 times 7 in the Gospels, and now when you combine all of it, you get 980. That's when it starts getting mind-blowing, and it keeps getting worse and worse as you go. But we won't get into all that right now. If you want to get into all that, that will be on KJVCode.com. On the site, you can see the patterns that we've published, where it just gets ridiculous. Now, when it comes to Father and Son, the capitalization is what creates these patterns in the King James Bible. The capitalization wasn't even the same way in 1611 as it is today. Capitalization, especially with Father and Son, it happened in the process of standardization. And it wasn't just like in 1769, like a lot of people think, that everything just switched. It was progressively over time. There was different years. If you go to KJVCode.com, this is one thing that we haven't really worked on too much yet, but we have done it for Father and Son. If you go to the very bottom of the site and click Timeline, what's going to happen is it's going to give you a little timeline of when patterns started to fall into place. So the one, if you go to the 1800s, is when you're going to see Father and Son. And the reason for that is because we have this really long, really elongated picture. If we were to click on that, you can see what the pattern is. But basically, you can see, whoops, let me go back to that. On the right-hand side, you can see here as well. You can see when lowercase father, it used to be lowercase father in 1611, but it became standardized here, and all these are in 1612. All these mentions of father, but they're all capitalized father today. In 1612, they were switched from lowercase to capitalized. And these ones are in 1617, 1619, 1638, 1637, 1762. I mean, there wasn't anything in 1769, actually. So 1778, 1800s, these were the last mentions to eventually fall into place, which is, I believe in each case, will be son of David. Which is also interesting because there was one mention of son of David, like in Matthew 12, also in Matthew 1:1, that never got capitalized. So how did that happen? It's in Matthew 12:23. If you just go to Matthew 12:23, this is how all King James Bibles are printed today. It says, and all the people were amazed and said, is not this the son of David? Why is that son not capitalized? That's just how it played out in the standardization. But ultimately, if that were capitalized, all of these perfect patterns would be gone. So this really plays with the perfection of the jot and the tittle. This really gets you to think about it. Same thing with, for example, in Old Testament mentions of Father. There's only one that actually gives you a capitalized mention. Right here where it says, the everlasting Father, and that's capital F. But right here, unto us a son is given is lowercase s. Again, that would throw off the count if it were a capitalized S, or if it were a lowercase f. But in other places of the Old Testament, 2 Samuel 7:14, I will be his father, there's lowercase f, but it's talking about God the Father, and he shall be my son. That's prophecy about Jesus, but as lowercase s. You could go to, even in the New Testament, in Hebrews 3:6, but Christ as a son over his own house, lowercase son. If that were capitalized, all the counts would be thrown off. There's other examples, many other examples as well. Malachi 2:10, have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? God the Father is lowercase. Once you get the big picture, you are forced to make a decision or to make a belief decision. This Bible ended up perfectly. Or this is the biggest coincidence in the history of the world. All of these patterns showing up perfectly with their names in the way that they're capitalized. You're forced to deal with that. This is either of God, or this is a miraculous coincidence of coincidences. The one other thing I want to mention is with Lord, all uppercase, if you're dealing with anti-mentions of Lord. The pure mention, obviously if you just case sensitive like this, you're always going to get pure mentions of Lord when it's all uppercase. But if you were to add the asterisk, just be careful because you're going to also include lords, which is in Revelation 19:16, which is not talking about God or Jesus, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So that is definitely referring to other lords, human lords, maybe even principality lords like in the spirit world or something, I don't know, but it's not talking about God. Jesus right here, this is the Lord. So if you were to include the asterisk for Lord, you could exclude lords just like this. Okay? Or you could just simply type it out like this, Lord or lords. Whoops. And that's going to give you the same count as well. And real quick, there is one more thing. There is one more thing that I just thought of. There are things called parable mentions where you're looking at a capitalized mention of Father, but it's in the form of a parable. So the parable is actually talking about God the Father, so the capitalized mention is valid. It is talking about the Father. And that's in Luke 15. So it's always better just to show you. Right here it says, I will arise and go to my father. This is the prodigal son. Notice how it's lowercase. I will go to my father and will say unto him, Father, capital F. This happens 3 times here in this parable, where Father is the beginning of the sentence, of the quotation, so it capitalizes it. But the parable itself is about God the Father. The Father in the parable is about God the Father. If you were to exclude it, well, then you're excluding a mention of capitalized Father when it's talking about God the Father. That's why it's so interesting with its other capitalized mentions and lowercase mentions of Father in the Bible, because you're already excluding lowercase mentions of Father that are not referring to God the Father in the Bible. But you're including all the capitalized mentions. So you logically, it makes sense to include the parable mention. And even if you don't, if you were to go the way of scholarship and say, well, since that is just based off of punctuation, that's just based off of grammar, that's not actually a God the Father mention. The thing about the King James Bible is that the scholar would also say the same thing about italicized mentions, right? So if you see Father in italics, well, that's not actually in the original language, that's just in English. But the problem with that is if you were to exclude all the mentions of Father italicized and Father in parables, you end up 70 times 7 mentions of Father or Fathers, the apostrophe, and Son in the New Testament. You can find that on the site if you simply type in Father, Son, and then refined. It's going to show up right here. So it'll explain all this as well in the description. But anyways, if you go into the site, if you want to just download a search file, you can do that as well. So if I download this, if I open it, now it's going to open all these mentions of Father and Son and anti-mentions. It even has parable mentions listed out, excluding all the italicized mentions. And then you get the New Testament count of 490 for Father or Fathers. And look, this is what I often do on the site. I click on it and then it crosses it out because it doesn't exist in the Bible. But I like to put that there on the site often just to show you consistency. Because if I were just to have it like this, it's true. But someone who's not familiar with the Bible and they see that, they think it's some sort of manipulation because they see fathers but not sons. So anyways, just a heads up that I do that on the site often. Okay, so that's how you get pure mentions in pure Bible search, along with some other commentary. Sorry for explaining things so much. I just want people to understand what they're seeing, what they're dealing with, what they're looking at, what's in their hands. And I pray that God gets all the glory. Thanks for watching, and I hope this is a help. Blessings in the Lord Jesus Christ.